Hello, I hope you all had a pleasant weekend. Today we're going to discuss listening, probing, and feedback, the listening, probing, and feedback model. So, employee development is universally recognized as a strategic tool for an organization's continued growth, productivity, profitability, efficiency, etc. The listening, probing, and feedback model is the tactical tool to reach that strategic goal of developing your employees. The model is it's effective if used properly. It's easy. Um, it will help solidify your expectations of your direct reports. It also develops a culture where employees begin to think for themselves. We've talked about the inefficiency of running an organization where every single idea comes out of one person's mind. The listening, probing, feedback model encourages a culture where people feel open and free to collaborate with their supervisors without judgment. In a culture where everyone is constantly learning, your organization's constantly improving. However, there is no magic wand. It will absolutely take patience and effort on your part, a lot of patience on your part, to develop your direct reports. Um, and what we'll do in your homework assignment, you only have one this week, is I'm going to have you video record um, you using this model on a either a coworker or a colleague that you've learned in the lecture. Okay, so let's get started with our first question of the day. Should managers be coaches or teachers? And I'll let you pause there for a second and kind of ponder that answer. But so to a degree, the answer is yes. To some extent, you're never going to hire the perfect employee. You're going to hire very qualified employees, very capable employees, but we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and there's always room for development. The goal of both teachers and managers is to teach their either students or direct reports to think for themselves. Okay, remember how effective and efficient this is when not every single decision has to be bottlenecked through a supervisor. The main impact effective supervisors have on their employees, um, part of it definitely motivating them is a big part of it, but it's also teaching them better work methods, and again teaching them how to think for themselves, which is motivational, right? That motivates an employee when you allow them to do that. About two-thirds of the productivity boosts from workers under a good supervisor persists even after that supervisor is gone or they've switched supervisors. So most people, this is a quote by Stephen Covey, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. And being that you guys have been in the workforce for some period of time, I imagine you already are aware of this, um, but it never helps to be reminded of it. And I want to challenge you to change this habit if you're thinking to yourself that this is what you do. As I've said in earlier lectures, just because you're listening to someone doesn't mean you are agreeing with them. It does mean you're trying to gather data and information and understanding. And I cannot do that, or we can't do that, if we're constantly flooding our head, our mind, with potential rebuttals and argument. So just listen. Listen to gain understanding. Wait to reply. So this is the listening, probing, feedback model. We listen first, we ask probing questions, and then we provide feedback to develop our employees. So listening by far is the most important coaching skill. It is. It sounds like it would be easy to do, but for many reasons, it's rarely done well. Um, and I think one of the reasons it seems to be so difficult for leaders to master this, or supervisors to master this, is we think that as supervisors or executives, that it is our job to know the answer and to give commands. Stopping to listen to an employee or direct report might almost seem counterintuitive to this, because we're not getting things done efficiently. It does take time to sit down and listen to someone. But it's been my experience that great managers, great executives, great leaders are the ones that have mastered this skill of listening. And when we are listening, we are actively absorbing the information that is given to us, and we are demonstrating to the person we're in a conversation with that we are interested, and we're paying attention to them. This is active listening. There's a difference between passive listening and active listening. We want to demonstrate to the person we're in a conversation with that their message is heard, we understand it, and I'll, in the next few slides, I'll show how to demonstrate that. Delivering verbal communication is like writing a paper. It involves trying to choose the right words and nonverbal cues to convey a message that will be interpreted in the way that you intend. And effective listeners show those speakers or those that they're in conversation with that they have been heard and that they've been understood. So as the slide states here, active listening is focused without distractions. We close our laptop, we put our cell phone away, we face the person, we make eye contact, right? We are focused on the conversation without distraction. We pay attention as to capture the essence of what is being said. The focus is placed on both verbal and nonverbal cues. We'll talk about that in subsequent slides, as I said earlier. It's not a bad idea to take notes to keep track of what is being said so you can effectively summarize the conversation. It's not even a bad idea, once an important conversation has occurred, to communicate that in an email. I do that with my clients all the time. I've told you guys about the CEO I'm working with in the case study. He's known as Aaron. He's very disorganized. He has conversations sort of on the spot, and his big weakness is that he doesn't remember what he said. So when we email those notes back of a conversation that we've had, it's almost like an insurance policy, right? It's especially if we're a direct report. And you can do this active listening goes both ways, especially if you're a direct report. But when you send that email detailing the notes of your conversation, this ensures to your supervisor that, hey, the message is read loud and clear. It also protects you in the future if that supervisor forgot what they said. You have black and white documentation of that conversation. So this is our way of demonstrating that we've listened. So active listening, right? We establish a physical location to listen. Again, like I said earlier, you shut your laptop off, you turn your phone off, you hold your calls, you close your door. If we take the time to listen to what others are saying, we have a better shot at getting a clear understanding of the problem. We've all been there, right? Where we know what the problem is, or we think we know what the problem is. We know what the solution is, but in that off moment where we actually pause and wait, and you say something like, "Wait, hold on, what did you say?" Right? That's because you were actively listening, right? It demonstrates respect. I've said this in previous lectures. Again, I'm listening to you doesn't necessarily mean that I'm agreeing with you, but I'm showing you respect, right? This very action helps develop a culture within your organization or a culture within your department. Generally, we realize there's more than one view, hopefully, if we're active listening, and we also empower those reporting to us. Again, this demonstrates respect when we take the time to sit down and listen. So the first tool in this active listening is non-verbal cues. Right? So coworkers can always tell if you're really listening to them by the nonverbal cues we give. We've done this, right? You knock on your boss's door. You're trying to have a conversation with him or her. They are intently staring at their computer, hacking away, or they're on their cell phone. Think about how this makes you feel. Right? Think of how it feels when you have something important to deliver. You have some important piece of information to deliver to either a coworker or a supervisor, and they're almost ignoring you. Think for a second how that I mean, it's annoying. I had one of the other case studies. I'm pretty sure I have it for this class. He was a young CEO. He was about 34, and before I showed up to the company, he had a very much older COO. His COO was about in his 60s. He was not a very pleasant person. And the CEO had a very bad habit of constantly texting. He was absolutely addicted to social media. It had nothing to do with the company. He wasn't working on business-related projects when he was on a cell phone. He was literally checking Facebook is what he was doing. The COO got so frustrated. I wouldn't recommend you do this, but the COO got so frustrated, he literally slapped the phone out of the CEO's hand because the COO felt that he was being disrespected, right? So the first one of these nonverbal cues are very practical. Things like, did you free up time did you make an appointment? Did you actually free up time to listen to someone? Did you make a break in your schedule? Again, did you hold your calls or put your cell phone on mute or your office phone on mute? Did you come out from behind your desk? Are you sitting next to them? Right? Other clues probably fall into this category of body language, right? So nodding your head to acknowledge that you've heard what I've said. You're showing a look of intent and interest. You're showing a look of concern. You don't have to drill laser beams into someone's eyes, but just pick a point on their face and occasionally glance at it. Let them know. Whatever your nonverbal cues are, the goal is to communicate nonverbally that you are listening to what someone is telling you. So let's see. So repeating what was said, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. Let me repeat back to you what you're talking about. All right. This is a way to verbally confirm to the person in your conversation with that you've actually heard and understood what they're trying to communicate to you. Right. Our personal filters and assumptions and judgments and beliefs can distort what we hear. Right. This is why it's very important for us to pay attention to listening. And not wait for someone to stop talking so we can say whatever we want to say. Right? As a listener, your role is to understand what is being said. This may require you to reflect on what is being said. So this is what we're talking about in the slide here is where we're summarizing the speaker's comments. Right? So what I'm hearing is, so it sounds like what you're saying is. You ask questions to clarify certain points. So what do you mean when you say X, Y, Z, right? We're trying to obtain information. We're trying to test our understanding. We're trying to engage the other person in conversation. We're showing interest, right? We want to do our absolute best. And this is tough for the extroverts out there, but you want to do your best to not interrupt, right? Don't assume, right? Don't assume what they're saying. Just wait and listen. Okay? When we interrupt, especially when we're wrong, all it does is frustrate the person we're talking to. It limits your understanding of the message because you're clouding your mind with rebuttals and retorts when what you should be doing is listening, right? So allow the speaker to finish each point before asking questions. And absolutely don't counter with arguments. In this part of the conversation, right? You can counter with arguments when you provide feedback. But for this moment, when we're listening, we are listening. That's our job, right? Okay, so next. Um, so the results of active listening, right? So again, this demonstrates a trust, right? Authentic listening generates a respect. We've talked about respect before. It demonstrates respect between the two people in conversation. Direct reports will naturally respond better to managers who they think are listening intently to their needs, right? And they will absolutely perform better for you, right? So productivity, right? Problems are solved faster if people are encouraged to explain problems and be given the freedom to work through those solutions out loud before being told what to do, right? Again, we are trying to train people to think for themselves, right? This is key to productivity. So allow them to figure out their own problems. You guide them through, right? But you just don't give them the answer right away. Again, I talk about the Socratic method in my classroom. I ask lots of questions because I know if I ask questions, the answers that come to the students' minds are going to be more potent than if I just give it to them, right? So another thing is cooler heads prevail, right? So listening intently helps both if you're in a potential conflict situation, right? This helps cooler heads prevail because we're not engaging, we're not behaving angrily or showing discontent, right? We're just listening, right? It also boosts confidence. Again, great listeners tend to have better self-esteem and a better self-image, and they're listening. So this actually makes sense, right? If you're insecure and you're worried about being uncovered or made to look bad, right? You're going to be defensive. And if you're defensive, you're going to interrupt, right? So if we're not interrupting, we are displaying confidence. You also make fewer mistakes when we listen, right? We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen more, right? When we listen more, we make fewer mistakes. Good listening leads to more accuracy in retaining the information. Again, so this goes back earlier when I said provide an email documenting the conversation, right? That's accuracy. And sending out that email is a demonstration of active listening. You'll remember important facts better, minimizing the risk of miscommunication and making mistakes later on. So the second coaching skill to master is asking the right probing questions. So probing is the art of again, asking just the right question to promote insight or encourage thoughtful analysis from the employee. Again, we are trying to teach our employees to think for themselves, right? This skill is just the right skill for managers to use to empower and develop their direct reports. And if used properly, it can encourage a direct report to give a careful analysis to a problem and come up with a solution that you can live with. So often, especially if we come up through the ranks and we've identified some method to some problem that we routinely come across, right? So it's very easy for us to say, oh, well, I've seen this before. Hey, they're a direct report. I've seen this many times. This is how you should do it, right? This is what we want to do, right? It seems efficient. It's quick, right? But all it's really doing is, in a sense, you're just micromanaging someone, right? Again, we're trying to develop them to think for themselves. So we may ask them, well, how would you do that, right? And you start asking them questions around the problem to get them to come up with the answer, or come up with an answer, or at least a solution to move forward, right? The key in probing questions is to know the correct areas to probe and to resist giving the answers if the probing process doesn't go quickly enough. It won't. Think if you had to, we have a ton of engineers in this class. Think if you had to explain undergraduate or even graduate level engineering and what you guys do in the plants to a high school student, how long that would take. Um, you have to be patient. Again, there's no magic wand here. It takes discipline and patience to develop employees. You are climbing a hill, and it's frustrating at first, right? And I hear it all the time. It's easier for me to do it on my own, especially in a plant environment where if something goes wrong, bad things can happen, right? Um, but ultimately, you have to work through that, right? Because if you're constantly giving the answer, your employees are not developing. More things are being bottlenecked through you. Your stress level goes up. You become less efficient and less effective. Um, so one of the great advantages to probing questions is that when direct reports come up with the solutions on their own, they're generally motivated. They're more motivated to implement their own solutions than if you just tell them what to do, right? So um, let's see. Let's take a look at the next slide. Um, so how do we do that, right? So there's two types of questions. There's open-ended questions and there are closed-ended questions. It's situationally dependent, but generally we want to use open-ended questions. So open-ended questions broaden the scope for the response since they demand further discussion and elaboration. So for example, you may say, how is the project going? Or how did the budget work out on that project? Right? These are open-ended questions. They allow for conversation. Right? Open-ended questions will take longer to answer, but they encourage involvement in the conversation, which for the most part, generally, that's what you want. Right? As opposed to closed-ended questions. Right? Closed-ended questions tend to seek only a one or two word answer. Often, generally it's yes or no. And in doing so, you're limiting the scope of the response. I just met with a client about this the other day. It works for Pinnacle Polymers. They had a relatively new employee. I think the new employee had been there for about 6 months. And again, I don't work in the plants, so I have a very limited understanding of the mechanics that go on there. But essentially, this new employee's supervisor wanted him to, I guess it was express a valve or open a valve to clear it out. And there were some details. He was only supposed to open it up so far, but there was some more sophisticated instructions than just open the valve. Well, the supervisor asked him, "Hey, do you understand what I'm telling you?" What do you think the guy said? He just shook his head and said, "Yeah, I understand." Well, he ended up doing it wrong. He opened the valve wide open and created the problem. He blew some debris everywhere, and then that new employee, who'd been there for about 6 months, spent the next day and a half cleaning up his mess. And it all went back to so think about new employees or really even eager employees, right? These folks want to please you. They want you to you to think that they're intelligent and they're capable, right? So they don't want to hassle you. If you ask them a question, a yes or no question, they're just going to say yes because they don't want to be perceived as incompetent, right? Don't you have to presume this, assume it's going to happen, allow for it, and have some compassion, especially with new employees, right? Ask them open-ended questions. What exactly, you have them repeat back to you what you've asked them to do, right? This is sort of the reverse, right? They are demonstrating to you what you have told them, right? So this is the benefit of an open-ended question. We want to try to avoid closed-ended questions. There are some exceptions, right? If you have someone who's particularly extroverted, where if you ask them an open-ended question, you can't get them to settle down. So you may want to literally engineer the conversation in such a way as to limit their response. But generally, we're trying to ask open-ended questions. Let's see, next. So let's talk about, did I go to the right slide? Yes. Okay, so let's talk about, no, we already talked about that. So again, examples of probing questions, right? So explain to me your thinking on that, elaborate the pros and cons, provide an example, fill me in, okay? You get the picture here. You know, it's what happened and when did you do that and how did you do that? Explain to me your thinking on that, right? You're just asking for elaboration, okay? So the last part of this model is feedback. It's probably the most important part of the model, right? But you can't get to feedback unless you've listened, right? And you can't get the feedback unless you've listened and unless you've asked the appropriate questions, right? When we're listening and probing, we are trying to fill our heads with the information that we need to guide an employee, to guide a direct report so they can eventually think for themselves. Okay. So you can pause here for a second. I'm sure this isn't a foreign term to you, but what is feedback? I'll let you think that over for a second. So feedback is, although feedback it's often mistaken as criticism, right? But well-delivered constructive criticism can help produce better decisions and improve performance. And again, it's not just constructive criticism. It's very wise for us to also, I call it providing affirming feedback. You also hear it as positive feedback. I prefer the word affirming feedback because I am affirming that what you have just done or the method that you use to complete whatever project it was I asked you to do, I'm telling you you've done it correctly. All right. So a lot of people confuse this with, oh, everybody gets a trophy, right? The positive feedback, right? Everybody gets a trophy. Hey, it doesn't hurt to make your employee feel appreciated, and I absolutely suggest that. But affirming feedback is really twofold here, right? There's that, I call it the cheerleader effect, right? You pat someone on the back, they feel good. That's useful, it's important. But the most important part of affirming feedback is if an employee has done something correctly, I want them to keep doing it that way, right? So I communicate to them, hey, good job. Next time you do it just like that, right? So manager feedback, it needs to be frequent and of high quality, right? Managers need to be confident enough to provide honest feedback, even when it's unpleasant or challenging. So those of you that are reading the Patrick Lencioni book, I don't know who all has gotten through it so far, but there's always this fear of providing feedback, right? We don't want to hurt people's feelings. But there's a downside to this, right? I would challenge a manager who doesn't have the guts to tell an employee they're not doing a good job. And then, because what happens is if we don't share that information with a poor performing employee, we eventually get frustrated. We start forming opinions and judgments about them, and eventually we fire them. And they don't even, if we do it incorrectly, they don't even know it's coming, right? So it is absolutely our obligation to provide feedback, especially to poor performing employees, right? We don't keep this stuff to ourselves. It's also important to provide it timely, right? So a lot of times feedback is given in, 6-month or annual feedback reports. That's wrong-headed, right? We should be providing feedback daily, right? And it's not a formal feedback session where we're sitting down with the employee an hour every day. We'd never get anything done if we did that. But a simple email, a conversation in the hallway, you are constantly guiding your employees in whatever it is that they're doing. So Falling short on timely feedback and honest constructive criticism will either leave employees without the knowledge that their performance must improve or stifle the efforts to change due to the lack of specific information on what will help them meet the expectations that you have set out. So this candid personal feedback is absolutely important for an employee's growth and development. It doesn't cost a thing. It just takes your discipline to sit down with someone, take the time to sit down with someone and provide that feedback. It should be delivered in a safe, I hate to say that, but a safe environment, and the employee should not be taken by surprise, right? I say a safe environment, basically, not on the plant floor, okay, not in front of other employees. Either go to their office or you bring them to your office, okay? This isn't about safe spaces and things like that. Feedback can be a two-way street, right? So not only is it important for managers to provide feedback on a consistent, regular basis, but employees should offer and managers should accept feedback. So employees should be giving feedback as well. And the manager, or supervisor, executive, you should be willing to accept this feedback. Okay, so the reason why this slide, it's a picture of a little present here is one of the phrases we use at Success Labs, it's a consulting firm I work for, is feedback is a gift, right? It's idealistically, it helps us do our job better, okay? And so receiving feedback provides managers with clues to how they may be hindering or supporting their subordinates. It can also, accepting feedback can also help you remove any obstacles that are preventing an employee from being successful. So we talked about this in the previous lectures about ego, right? If we're getting feedback, let's say we're getting feedback from someone we don't like, the immediate knee-jerk response is to ignore that feedback, right? I don't like this person. There's absolutely no way they can give me anything constructive or intelligent to help me improve myself or improve my job performance. Again, this is wrong-headed, right? We should listen, even if we're disagreeing. Now, we synthesize whatever feedback we've been provided. It may absolutely be useless. It might be, right? But when we come to that conclusion, we come to that conclusion logically, using rationale, right? Rational judgment, not our egos and not our emotions. Okay, so you take the information in and you logically decide, can I use this or can I not use this? Okay, we don't simply dismiss because it's an employee or a peer or a coworker or a supervisor we don't like. It's this is a very very important aspect of receiving feedback. We should always be patient and we should always listen. So let's actually go through the feedback model. So we're actually almost done. There's only a few more slides here. This is a pretty short lecture today. So it's the situation behavior impact model. It's very, very quick, right? So when giving feedback, managers should first define the situation in which the behavior occurred, right? Specifying the situation puts the feedback into context and gives the employee a specific setting to reference. So for example, right, and you'll see as we go through the next 4 slides or 3 slides, it kind of builds on itself. So when I'm talking about a situation, so yesterday morning during the team meeting, when you gave your presentation, that's the situation, okay? Or at the client meeting on Monday afternoon, that's the situation, okay? So it's not you always do this or I see that you often do something, right? It's not we're not using generalizing, we're not oversweeping generalizations, right? We are providing a very specific situation in which we observed an employee behave a certain way, okay? So we go from situation to behavior. That's the second part. So management should not rely on hearsay, as it may reflect other individuals' subjective judgments. Again, this subjectivity could undermine the feedback and jeopardize, not just relationships, but the quality of the feedback, right? If you're getting your information from third party and you're not actually trying to get that information yourself, that third party information could be wrong, right? Somebody else may be allowing their emotions or their ego to influence their judgment of another employee's job performance. So I think I said this earlier in a recorded lecture, but one of the employees that works for the firm I'm consulting for, it's in Mississippi, and it's what does this guy do? He's the inventory manager, okay, and he's in the deep South, and he's gay, and his job performance or his job requirement he doesn't have times where he necessarily has to show up to work at a certain time or leave at a certain time. He does have objectives and goals that he has to hit, but that's not always correlated with him showing up on time. Well, you can imagine if the company's in Mississippi and he is gay, it's not fair, but the employees, they don't like him. They give him a hard time. And what they'll do is they'll poke at the fact that he shows up late. But it doesn't matter because he's meeting all of his objectives. So when I first started interviewing this company, everybody gave this guy a bad rap, said he was a lousy employee. But when I looked over what he was doing, and when I spoke with the CEO and I spoke with the CFO, they were fine with his performance. So had I listened to all of his all the other workers in the warehouse, I would have gotten the wrong perspective on this employee. So don't rely on hearsay, right? Get the information yourself and try to get that information as objectively as possible. All right. So going back to the slide here. So during yesterday morning's team meeting, that's the situation. You were uncertain about two of the slides in your presentation, and your sales calculations were incorrect, right? This is very specific, right? And I'm not even making a judgment. I didn't say in this scenario, I didn't say, hey, in yesterday morning's meeting, you were absolutely unprepared. That's incorrect. That's hearsay. That's an assumption, right? I don't say that they weren't prepared. I simply say that in your presentations, your calculations were incorrect, right? I'm cutting the fat out of this conversation, right? Another example is at the client, positive example. At the client meeting yesterday afternoon, you ensured the meeting started on time. That's an observation, right? Everyone had their handouts in advance. All of your research was correct, and everyone's questions were answered. These are observations of behavior, not assumptions of behavior, right? This is important, right? When we're observing an employee's behavior, I want you to almost think of yourself as not to sound goofy here, but I want you to think of yourself as a scientist, right? You are observing their behavior. You're not making assumptions. This is super important, right? We don't let our especially if we don't like an employee. It's even more important that we behave in this way. We want to make sure we're giving someone a fair shot, especially if we don't like them. When we go to terminate them, it may be said that, well, you terminated this employee because you didn't like them, right? This is an insurance package. We are trying to remove all doubt, right, by behaving in this manner. So the next slide is impact. So situation, behavior, impact, and these build on each other. So the last step is we use an I statement to describe how how your employees' actions have affected either you or the organization. So let's go back to situation, right? During yesterday morning's team meeting, that's the situation. The behavior was you were uncertain about two of your slides, and your presentation and your presentation and your sales calculations were incorrect. That's the behavior. The impact is I was embarrassed, or you embarrassed the team because the entire board was there. I'm worried this episode has affected the reputation of our team, right? So situation, behavior, impact, right? And then, when we start talking about impact, this is an opportunity, you can then go into asking probing questions. How would you do this differently? What went wrong? Walk me through the process, to figure out why the calculations were wrong. Again, we're trying to train our employees to think for themselves. You may see in this scenario where they made an error in their math, you can correct them, right? And this is, by doing this, you're changing their behavior. If you just make an assumption that they were unprepared and you simply say you were unprepared, you're not teaching them anything, right? And I understand that the argument I often get is, well, my employees should know better. Maybe, right? That's a valid argument. But if that's your approach 100% of the time, no one's ever going to learn anything. And at the end of the day, if you're a supervisor or an executive, you're responsible for the productivity and the production and the efficiency of your organization, which requires you to go back to that employee and fix them and train them, right? Now, the last step is, we'll say, next steps, right? So once the feedback is given, the employee should be encouraged to think about the situation and understand the impact of his or her behavior. An expectation should absolutely be set that if consistent poor performance might require reassignment, disciplinary action, or eventual termination. So make sure you have a method for checking whether or not the issue has been corrected. All right, so they made a mathematical error on their slide. You listened, probed, and you provided feedback. You trained them. You fixed them. Now you have to ensure that they won't make that mistake again. So maybe before the next presentation, you might ask them, "Hey, remember this conversation we had?" Right? To make sure that they are successful. Meet again with the employee, either formally or informally, and let them know what you've observed in the interim, right? So if you've corrected them and they haven't fixed their behavior, say something, right? Once feedback is given, once feedback is given, they should be encouraged to think about their actions, okay? And it's on your company's culture how long you do this before making a decision to let someone go. I would say that should be your the last tool in your toolbox. I mean, it's absolutely necessary to terminate employees, but you want to give them a fighting chance. You want to give them the opportunity to fix themselves, right? Okay, so we're going to go over the homework. So this week is the Lencioni paper. I have no doubt you already looked at the instructions, but we'll go over this anyway, since we can't go over it in class. So by now, I'm sure you guys have written quite a few papers, but writing a paper is a staple of college work, graduate and undergraduate. I actually used this assignment in one of my undergrad business classes. Paper should be written in APA 6. You're probably not going to use other references, but if you do, cite them. I don't see why you would. So really, your reference page should be a reference of the 5 dysfunctions of a team. A paper should be no less than 10 pages, double space, 1-inch margins, Times New Roman. So when we say APA 6, this is what we're talking about, including the reference page and the in-text citations. If you go above 10 pages, that's not a problem. I'm not going to penalize you for that. Again, you can use outside references, although I don't know why you would. Please don't plagiarize. Let's see. If you quote the book word for word, and then cite that, just make sure you provide a page number and you indent. You can get further instructions on Purdue OWL. We'll talk about how you would actually cite verbatim passages from the book. Let's see what else. Please, each page should be numbered and centered at the bottom. Your cover page and your reference page does not count towards the 10 pages. This is the cover page I want you guys to use. And then these are the questions. This shouldn't be a problem to fill up 10 pages with these questions. So, summarize the book. This is your abstract. What's the book's central theme? What were the initial concerns regarding Catherine's arrival? What did the team think of her when she showed up? Where was she working before? Where are they working? What are the differences? What did Catherine do her first 2 weeks that almost irritated everybody, right, when she got there? What were the behaviors of the staff that you found most annoying? There's lots of examples, I'm sure by now you can pull from. What was the analogy of the broken leg that Catherine used? What was the key indicator that Catherine gave for concluding there was no trust in the team? She talks about this. Do you disagree or agree with Catherine's statement that teamwork begins by building trust? And the only way to overcome that trust is to overcome the need for invulnerability. Define each of the 5 dysfunctions and identify which dysfunction each team member displayed. Okay, that shouldn't be too hard. What strategies did Catherine employ to keep each team member? I'm jumping ahead. Which strategies did Catherine employ with each team member to move them from a position of being dysfunctional to functional? And what ended up happening to each employee? So some of them jumped on board for the team, some didn't stick around for various reasons. Talked about that. How did each team member cope with the changes that she brought them through? And then lastly, what were your insights? What did you gain from reading this? And that's it. The scoring rubric is down here. This is basically a repeat of what we just talked about. I do have this on here. This is a lot of this is a sort of a uniform assignments. I put this at the bottom of every time I have a student write a paper. Again, your reference page will be a page of 1. It's the book that you read. So don't stress too much about this. And that's it. If you have any questions, go ahead and email me. And believe it or not, I do read. I look forward to reading these papers. I do enjoy this book. And I enjoy reading the papers that you guys write from this book. So that's it. I hope you guys have a good week. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. Take care.